The assassination of Julius Caesar, how 60 men killed a republic. It was a day like any other in Rome, until 60 men walked into a Senate meeting with daggers hidden in their togas, and walked out having changed history forever. The Ides of March, 44 B.C.E. Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, master of Rome, and dictator for life, entered the Theatre of Pompey expecting a routine Senate meeting. What he got instead was betrayal, bloodshed, and a death so dramatic it could have been written by the gods themselves. But how did it come to this? How did 3 men, Cassius, Brutus, and Decimus, go from loyal allies to cold-blooded conspirators? Why did 60 senators join the plot, and what did they hope to gain? What warnings did Caesar ignore, and what lies led him straight into the trap? Who whispered in his ear, who struck the fatal blow, and who stood frozen as history unfolded? This is not just the story of a murder. It's the story of a republic on the edge, of ambition disguised as patriotism, and of a man who wielded the powers of a king without ever wearing a crown. From Calpurnia's haunting dream to Cassius's cold logic, from Decimus's deception to Brutus's final blow, this is the tale of how Rome bled before Caesar did, and why the knives didn't just kill a man, they killed an era. So, if you think you know the story of Caesar's assassination, think again. Subscribe to Dark Crown Chronicles and witness the betrayal that changed the world. In the grand theater of Roman politics, there were no dull days, but none was more dramatic or more fatal than the day Julius Caesar met his end. By 44 B.C.E., Rome was in tatters, and not just from the endless internal squabbles. The Senate, once a bastion of Roman ideals, was reduced to a hollow echo of its former self, its members more concerned with self-preservation than the health of the republic. And then there was Caesar. Julius Caesar, the man who'd fought and bled across Europe, was now stacking titles like they were Roman coins. Dictator for life, he proudly proclaimed, much to the chagrin of his opponents. He wore purple robes, sat on a golden throne, and even had a month named after him, July, because, of course, the man who won battles in Gaul and crushed Pompey at Pharsalus deserved that. But for all his glory, Caesar made the fatal mistake of becoming too much of a spectacle. He played the part of the magnanimous ruler with all the theatrical flair of a man who wanted to be adored. Enter the Lupercalia festival, a time of celebration, lusty debauchery, and the occasional political drama. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally, took it upon himself to play the royal announcer. During the festival, he offered Caesar a crown, not once, but 3 times. Caesar, with all the humility he could muster, turned it down each time. Yet, the damage had been done. The public saw this not as a modest refusal, but as a cleverly staged performance. Caesar had just shown his cards. He wanted the crown, and everyone knew it. The whispers grew louder. Caesar was positioning himself as king, a title the Romans loathed more than they loathed taxes. But Caesar, for all his military genius, was blinded by his own ego and thought the people loved him enough to overlook his growing autocracy. He underestimated the brewing resentment of those he had pardoned, the senators who had been humiliated and sidelined in favor of his power. The shadows that loomed over Caesar's rule were cast by 3 key men, each with his own brand of treachery, pride, and idealism. Their motivations were as tangled as the roads to Rome, and their actions would shake the very foundations of the empire. Cassius Longinus, the bitter blade. Cassius was the type of man who'd win a naval battle with nothing but a rowboat, a foul mood, and a desperate desire to prove himself. He'd earned his reputation the hard way, fighting against the Parthians under Crassus. Yes, that Crassus, the one who managed to get himself killed and have his army obliterated at Carrhae. Cassius, however, rallied the survivors, defending Syria like a man possessed. But pride, that ever-persistent companion, always shadowed him. Later, in the Civil War, Cassius commanded Pompey's fleet and shocked the Roman world by actually being good at naval warfare. A rare achievement in Rome, where most admirals confused the starboard with something you drink. When Pompey lost and was defeated, Cassius was captured, but Caesar, always the opportunist, pardoned him and even gave him command of a legion headed to Egypt. In Egypt, the campaign was a disaster, but Cassius held his ground. However, when Caesar planned his grand Parthian campaign, he gave Cassius a dull desk job in Syria, paperwork, taxes, the boring stuff. Cassius, who had once saved Syria, was now reduced to filing its tax returns. The slap in the face stung, and Cassius, unable to stomach his newfound insignificance, joined the conspiracy. After all, why accept a desk job when you could stab Caesar in the back and take his place? Cassius's fatal flaw? Pride. His blunder? Thinking Caesar's mercy would extend forever. Marcus Brutus, the philosopher with a knife. Brutus was not a soldier. He was a man of ideas, stoic ideas, mind you, the kind of person who'd quote Plato while lacing his sandals. His devotion to the Republic was not just political, it was spiritual. Brutus had once sided with Pompey, though not exactly fighting him. His best contribution to the Civil War was probably just waving the white flag. Then, Caesar came along. Caesar, with his soft spot for Brutus, made him governor of Cisalpine Gaul. He even promised him the consulship one day. Why? Because Brutus's mother, Servilia, had been Caesar's lover for years. Yes, that Servilia, which meant Brutus grew up in Caesar's orbit. Caesar, in some bizarre father figure way, treated him like a favored nephew. But Brutus had a problem: idealism. He truly believed the Republic could be saved by virtue, like a child believing in bedtime stories. His fatal mistake? Stabbing Caesar, believing it would restore the Republic. It was, of course, a naive delusion. As much as Brutus loved Rome, the brutal reality was that his beloved Republic had long been a corpse, and Caesar was merely the gravedigger. Decimus Brutus, the loyal betrayer. Decimus Brutus, now here's the twist. He was one of Caesar's most loyal followers, a general in Caesar's army who had served him in Gaul, fought at Alesia, and crushed uprisings in Cisalpine Gaul. He was the trusted man, rewarded and respected in Caesar's inner circle. So much so that when Caesar was setting up his own future, Decimus was in line to be the next praetor. But Decimus wasn't motivated by honor, loyalty, or principle. No, his motivation was fear. He feared Caesar's growing power, and more importantly, he feared being left in Caesar's shadow forever. To him, betrayal wasn't just the price of doing business, it was the only way to ensure Rome's survival. In the end, Decimus made the cardinal sin of the ambitious. He mistook Caesar's favor for weakness. His fatal mistake? Believing that stabbing Caesar would preserve Rome, when in reality, he was helping usher in its collapse. When you think about conspiracies, you usually imagine a tight-knit group, maybe a few shadowy figures lurking in the corners of dimly lit rooms. But not this one. The plot to assassinate Julius Caesar wasn't just cooked up by 3 disgruntled senators. No, this was more like a Netflix drama, with a rotating cast of overqualified amateurs. The first 3 players were, let's say, the core team, but their plans quickly turned into something more ambitious. They were experienced, battle-hardened, and extremely disillusioned. Gaius Trebonius, former consul, Gallic war veteran, and officially the guy who was done with Caesar's snubs. He had fought for Rome, worked hard, and did not appreciate Caesar's attitude toward the Senate. His anger was like a Roman hot pot, slowly simmering for years. Tullius Cimber, a praetor, former Caesarian, and now hungry for power. He had once been part of Caesar's camp, but, like a jilted lover, had been shoved aside for a better-looking Senate job. Let's face it, nothing makes a man hungrier than realizing he's been downgraded in a political org chart. Publius Servilius Casca, tribune of the plebs, childhood friend of Caesar, now alarmed by his authoritarian glow-up. Once a man of the people, Casca now found himself horrified by Caesar's rise to dictator for life, because nothing says betrayal like realizing your childhood friend has transformed into a totalitarian god. And then 60 senators got on board. Yes, you read that right. 60 senators. That's 7% of the entire Senate. And as every covert operative will tell you, that's too many people to keep a secret. They gathered in the shadows, whispering in corners, plotting in courtyards, and arguing like a dysfunctional family planning a surprise party with knives. The conspirators had their sights on the big prize, Caesar. But when it came time to round up more help, the recruitment process was like a bad reality show audition. They needed muscle, brains, and stealth. And here's where the trouble started. Mark Antony. The muscle they couldn't trust. Antony was Caesar's right-hand man, his co-consul, his drinking buddy, and his human battering ram. The conspirators thought they could sway him to their side. But Trebonius, ever the optimist, had already tried and been shut down by Antony. Antony was like that one friend who knows how to party but will throw you under the bus if you try to mess with their VIP seat. Verdict? Too loyal, too dangerous, too ripped. Antony was out. Cicero, the last of the old guard. Cicero had crushed the Catiline conspiracy, written speeches that could bring tears to the eyes of anyone with a soul, and was one of the last non-Caesarian consuls still standing. He had done his time in the Senate, but lately he had been getting too cozy with Caesar's crowd. Too wishy-washy for the conspirators' taste. Verdict? Too old. Too unpredictable. Too verbose. Cicero was out. The plan was simple. Caesar had to die in public, but how? The conspirators needed to get their act together, and fast. They brainstormed like a bunch of half-drunk senators at happy hour, throwing out ideas that were either too ambitious or way too theatrical. The election plan. The idea was to kill Caesar while he oversaw the elections. He'd be high on a platform, surrounded by voters. The problem? He'd be in a VIP zone with bodyguards and riots. Lots of riots. Not ideal for a quiet murder. Verdict? Too crowded. Too risky. Too many people. Plan scrapped. The bridge plan. This one involved ambushing Caesar on his way to the elections and pushing him off a bridge. Once he hit the water, the job would be finished. But there was one problem. The conspirators were senators, not Olympic sprinters. The plan involved way more athleticism than they were ready to commit to. Verdict? Too slow. Too clumsy. Not happening. The gladiator plan. This one was theatrical, for sure. Use Decimus's gladiators to kill Caesar during public games. The idea was to have Caesar stabbed during an arena spectacle. Lots of drama, lots of crowds. But the conspirators quickly realized that gladiators aren't exactly subtle. Verdict? Too obvious. Too loud. Too much spectacle. Out. The conspirators drank, argued, and refueled their collective bitterness until one thing became clear. They were running out of time. They needed a plan. Fast. They were on a ticking clock, and not the kind you get from a fancy new wristwatch. No, they had days. Then came the bombshell. Caesar was leaving Rome on March 18th. The conspirators had assumed they had months, but now they had days. Time was of the essence. Old plans were scrapped, and now it was all hands on deck. They needed something fast, public, and controlled. March 15th, 44 B.C.E., the Ides of March, a date that would live in infamy. The plan was simple, and for once, it was the right one. Caesar would attend a Senate meeting in the Theatre of Pompey. This venue was perfect. It was public, but isolated enough to give the conspirators control. Plus, bodyguards weren't allowed inside. The symbolism was delicious. It was like stabbing a tyrant in the heart of his empire, in front of the very Senate that had once held such power. But there was a catch. The Senate kept shifting venues because Caesar was funding a redesign of Rome. So the conspirators couldn't stash weapons in advance. This meant they had to get creative, and fast. It was March 14th, 44 BCE, and as the conspirators continued to sharpen their daggers and rehearse their lines for the Ides of March, Cassius Longinus, the ever-cynical tactician, had one question that was starting to eat at him, like a tick burrowing into the skin of Roman politics. What about Antony? Mark Antony, Caesar's co-consul, his closest ally, and his human battering ram. He was a force to be reckoned with, physically and politically. He could command the legions, swagger through the streets with the confidence of a man who had never met a battle he didn't like, and was known to throw himself into the fray with the enthusiasm of a gladiator on his first day of training. So naturally, Cassius was worried. "Look," he said, his voice low and bitter, as if he had already envisioned the worst-case scenario. "If we kill Caesar and leave Antony alive, he'll just step into the role of the new Caesar. He'll rally the legions, and before we know it, we'll be crushed like grapes in a winepress. They'll have Rome in the palm of his hand." This wasn't a man given to understatements. Cassius was a pragmatist, a realist, and maybe just a little paranoid. He wasn't about to risk everything for just one kill. Not when the stakes were higher than the Colosseum's top tier. And so, the cold logic of Cassius came alive. "What about Lepidus?" he added, his voice gaining momentum. Now, Lepidus wasn't a consul, but he was in charge of a legion and had parked his troops on Tiber Island, just outside Rome's sacred Pomerium. He wasn't a huge player, but he was positioned well enough to make a mess of things if Caesar fell. If Antony declared a state of emergency, Lepidus could march in and restore order, with the conspirators dangling from the rostra like cheap Roman togas. The plan was simple: take out Caesar, Antony, and Lepidus. Kill the heads, seize the legions, and then force the Senate to bless the bloodbath. Cassius was envisioning a triple kill, like a Roman version of The Godfather, a blood-soaked coup with a touch of class. But not everyone was on board. Enter Marcus Brutus, the philosopher in a toga, a man whose moral compass was as unwavering as a Stoic's resolve. Brutus wasn't exactly thrilled with Cassius's idea of a triple kill. While Cassius and the ex-Pompeians, those who had backed Pompey in the Civil War, were gearing up for a complete purge of Caesar's allies, Brutus stood his ground like a well-read rock in the middle of a political storm. "We're not revolutionaries," Brutus argued, his voice calm but resolute. "We're not here to overthrow the government, we're here to save it." Brutus believed in something deeper. He didn't just want to kill Caesar, he wanted to restore the Republic, not tear it apart like a toga in the Senate. Caesar's reforms were popular with the people, and if the conspirators started purging Caesar's allies left and right, they'd end up dismantling everything Caesar had put in place. And once that happened, the Roman people would turn on them faster than you could say, et tu, Brute. Brutus wanted a clean break. He argued for a surgical strike, just Caesar and no one else. No purges, no chaos, just a precise, well-executed death that would serve as a signal to the Republic that Caesar's reign had gone too far. Cassius and his fellow ex-Pompeians grumbled and grunted, but Brutus held firm. And in the end, the majority agreed. The plan was set, Caesar only. As the conspirators honed their weapons, rehearsed their lines, and plotted their moves like a group of drunk chess players, Caesar went about his business. But the universe had other plans. On March 14th, Spurina, a priest with a gossip-worthy reputation, warned Caesar about something strange in the air. He told Caesar that danger loomed ahead, and Caesar would have none of it. But Spurina wasn't the only one whispering. Even the gods seemed to be sending warnings. Caesar, in the midst of his usual scheduling, turned to Cassius, one of his conspirators, and muttered, "You know, Cassius, I don't like that man's face. There's something in his eyes. Something not right about him." Cassius, likely wondering if Caesar was talking about him, merely shrugged and hoped for the best. But little did Caesar know, the warning wasn't just coming from within the Senate. It was a whisper in the wind, a sign that even fate was conspiring against him. Then, there was the dinner party on March 14th. That night, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, had a vivid dream. And when I say vivid, I mean she woke up screaming. Her dream wasn't just your average nightmare, this was epic-level stuff. She saw the roof collapsing. She was covered in blood, holding Caesar's mangled body. Now, Calpurnia wasn't a superstitious woman. She wasn't the type to go around consulting augurs before every meal. But this dream shook her to her core. It felt too real. She begged Caesar not to go to the Senate the next day. After all, who would want to go to work after having a vision of your own death? Caesar, feeling sluggish and dizzy that morning, probably the result of a little too much wine at the dinner, agreed. He sent word to Mark Antony, his co-consul, to cancel the Senate meeting. And just like that, the conspiracy was about to unravel. But Caesar's fate wasn't sealed yet. Entered Decimus Brutus, the smooth-talking conspirator who was skilled in the art of deception. Decimus showed up at Caesar's house and asked why he wasn't going to the Senate. Caesar told him about Calpurnia's dream. Decimus, like the Shakespearean villain he was, laughed it off. "Superstitious nonsense," he said, his tone light as a feather. "If word gets out that you canceled the Senate meeting because of your wife's dream, the Senate will see it as an insult." But Decimus didn't stop there. He knew what made Caesar tick, his ego. He dropped the bait with a smile. "There's a bill in the works to make you king, but it's only valid outside Italy. If you cancel the Senate meeting now, the Senate might never approve it." That was a lie. A complete fabrication. But Caesar, driven by his unshakable belief in his own destiny, took the bait. He agreed to go. And just like that, Decimus had saved the conspiracy. On the way to the Senate, a man named Artemidorus tried to push his way through the crowd, holding a scroll in his hand. The scroll was the death note, the conspiracy exposed in all its detail. "Read this quickly," Artemidorus urged. "It concerns you personally." Caesar, always mobbed by petitioners, handed it off to an aide without a second thought. After all, he had far more important matters to deal with than some random scroll. He never read it. And that was it. The Senate meeting was set. The conspirators were ready. They had hidden daggers in their togas, tucked weapons inside baskets of stationery, and waited for their moment. The date was locked in, March 15th, 44 B.C.E. Caesar walked into the Senate that day, surrounded by men he thought were allies, friends, and loyalists. His bodyguards weren't allowed inside. The stage was set. The curtain was rising. Now, here's where things take a delicious turn. Decimus Brutus, one of the lead conspirators, had a side hustle. He ran a gladiator company. When he learned about the location of the Senate meeting, he tried to get his gladiators signed up for the games. But alas, they were rejected. Decimus's gladiators were left loitering outside the arena, armed and awkward, pretending to be waiting for a contract violator to appear. This, of course, was the least subtle part of the entire plan. If you're trying to secretly assassinate a dictator, maybe don't send a bunch of gladiators loitering around like they're on a lunch break. Caesar and Decimus were incredibly late to the Senate. While most of the senators were milling about outside, engaging in their usual political gossip, Cassius Longinus, the strategist, the schemer, the man with the plan, stood alone inside the temple, staring at the statue of Pompey. Was he reflecting on the past, regretting his decisions? Or was he simply psyching himself up for the monumental betrayal he was about to partake in? Cassius, ever the planner, spotted Decimus and Casca, two of his fellow conspirators, outside in the crowd. He pulled them aside for a quick chat, wondering if this would be the moment to act. But something was off. There was a growing sense of unease in the air. The crowd was getting restless. Just then, a senator named Laenas approached Casca and made an announcement so loudly that it could have been heard across the Tiber River. "Casca, Brutus told me your little secret. How dare you keep me in the dark?" Casca froze. He didn't know what to say. But Laenas didn't stop there. "I hear you're running for aedile. When did this happen?" The conspirators froze in terror. Was this it? Was the entire plot about to unravel because of one gossipy senator? It wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, but it was still bad. But wait, false alarm. It was just political gossip, nothing more. The conspirators exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Then another senator approached Cassius and Decimus. He whispered urgently, "I hope you accomplish your task. Please do not delay. People know. They are talking." Cassius and Decimus exchanged worried glances. The tension was mounting. Was the plot compromised? Was it time to strike? They looked toward Caesar. Everything seemed normal. Then Laenas, that darned busybody, approached Caesar and whispered something in his ear. The conspirators' hearts skipped a beat. Was this the moment of truth? Did Laenas just blow their cover? But it turned out to be nothing. Laenas walked away and the crowd started moving inside. Caesar, unperturbed, followed. At this point, Trebonius, another conspirator, took action. He spotted Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man and most dangerous ally, and pulled him aside for a private conversation. The trap was set. Antony, the muscle, was now out of the picture, safely distracted and removed from the room. Caesar entered the temple, and as he did, he found a seat on his golden chair. His bodyguards, ever present, were left outside. The Senate meeting was, in all honesty, poorly attended. Only 200 to 300 senators showed up, and 60 were conspirators. That's a full 20 to 30% of the room. No wonder people were whispering. The conspirators rose as one, like a well-coordinated but slightly overzealous choir. Tullius Cimber, one of the lead conspirators, stepped forward and approached Caesar. He asked Caesar to pardon his brother, an ex-Pompeian fugitive who had apparently not been on the Caesar's favorite people list. Caesar, ever the ruler, refused. He has shown no remorse, no pardon. At this moment, Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga and yanked it down, exposing his shoulder. That was the signal. And then it happened. Casca, who had been lurking behind Caesar, drew his dagger and stabbed downward but missed. The blade only grazed Caesar's shoulder. Caesar spun around, surprised and confused, grappling with Casca. "Casca, what are you doing?" he asked, likely feeling betrayed and alarmed. Or, perhaps in another version, he muttered, "This is violence." The tension in the room was palpable. Every man in the Senate froze. Then Casca cried out in Greek, "Brother, help me!" The call for help was answered. Titiadius, Casca's brother, lunged forward and stabbed Caesar between the ribs, landing the fatal blow. Caesar, now staggering and bleeding, rose to his feet and saw Cassius standing there. Cassius slashed him across the face. But the attack didn't stop there. Titidius lunged again, stabbing Caesar in the back. Two non-conspirators attempted to intervene, but the perimeter held them back. The senators in the room, who had once praised Caesar as their savior, were now watching him bleed to death at their feet. And then Decimus struck. He stabbed Caesar in the thigh. Cassius tried again but missed, landing a blow on Brutus's hand by accident. Chaos ensued. Finally, Brutus, the once beloved nephew, approached Caesar. With his own hand trembling, he raised his dagger and stabbed Caesar in the groin. Caesar, his strength fading fast, pulled his toga over his face, a final humble gesture to conceal his death. He crumpled beneath the statue of Pompey, his old adversary, as the Senate, the body that had once trusted him, sealed his fate. With Caesar's lifeless body slumped on the cold marble floor, the conspirators took their turns. Some of them, eager to say they'd participated in the grand murder, went up to stab the corpse. Caesar sustained 23 wounds, but only one, the stab from Titidius, was fatal. The rest were mostly superficial, a blood-soaked mess of indecision and confusion. Out of the 5 confirmed attackers, Casca struck the shoulder, Cassius hit the face. Titidius made the fatal wound to the ribs. Decimus got the thigh. Brutus delivered the final blow to the groin. The assassination lasted less than a minute. Many senators didn't even leave their seats, and then came the silence. Brutus, the moral center of the conspiracy, as he looked into Caesar's eyes, he would later claim the words, "Et tu, Brute," were Caesar's final words, a tragic cry to the man he trusted most. The Senate erupted into chaos. Caesar, the man who had triumphed over Gaul, Pompey, and his enemies, had fallen to the very men he had spared. His assassination didn't restore the Republic. It hastened its decline. Caesar had many flaws: pride, arrogance, overconfidence, but his most glaring weakness was his underestimation of his enemies. He thought he could manipulate Rome with a combination of power, charm, and mercy. He spared the very men who would eventually take him down, thinking they were loyal, but they saw him as a tyrant. His refusal to act decisively against those who would conspire against him was the final mistake. Rome was already a city of whispers, of backstabbing, and of betrayal long before the Ides of March. Caesar's pride, his belief that he was untouchable, his failure to address the deep discontent in the Senate, and his political maneuverings all led to the moment when the conspirators finally acted. They had their reasons, but in the end, they all underestimated one thing. Caesar had already won, and by murdering him, they sealed the fate of the Republic. The Ides of March wasn't just the death of Caesar. It was the death of a dream, a republic, and the beginning of an empire. The blade that killed Caesar didn't just pierce his heart, it pierced the very soul of Rome itself. Unlock the secrets of history with Dark Crown Chronicles. Are you captivated by tales of betrayal, power, and the shadows of history? Do you crave stories that peel back the layers of the past, revealing the intrigues and conflicts that shaped our world? Then, Dark Crown Chronicles is your ultimate destination. From the rise and fall of empires to the quiet whispers in the corridors of power, we bring you the untold stories, the legends, and the realpolitik that define the world as we know it. Each episode is more than just a story. It's a journey through time, where every betrayal, every decision, and every action echoes through the ages. But here's the twist. We're just getting started. There's more to uncover, more to explore, and more to understand. And to truly immerse yourself in these incredible tales, you need to join us. Hit subscribe and become part of the Dark Crown Chronicles community. Don't just watch history, live it. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the next chapter. You won't want to miss what's coming next.